then, guys, welcome back to the Cycle Sunday podcast. Season 3 is here after about 3 months off. Paul, my friend, how are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And how are you?
I'm pretty good, mate. I'm pretty good. So, slightly new format for Season 3 of the Cycle Sunday podcast. We are going to be doing a podcast every other week. So, every fortnight on Sunday at 6 p.m., we will drop a podcast. And we thought we would start off with something pretty special. You will notice that we are joined by someone else. Paul, would you like to introduce our special guest?
I certainly will. This is our good friend, Tracy Moseley. And Tracy Moseley is just an inspiration to basically anybody who is into mountain biking generally, but certainly to anybody who's into female mountain biking. And we are so excited to be talking to her today.
Great. Cool. Tracy, lovely to meet you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to chatting.
Great. Now, so I guess let's for people who haven't heard of you or coming to cycling from afresh, just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll delve down into the details.
Okay. Well, yeah, Tracy Moseley. I'm now nearly 43, so had nearly 25 years of racing and being involved in mountain biking. Started in my mid-teens. Straight into downhill, really. Lazy kid, didn't like pedaling up hills, so went from downhill. And then as that progressed, finally won the World Championships after many years of trying in 2011. Progressed to Enduro and been racing Enduro for the first 3 years of the Enduro World Series. Finally retired from that in 2015 and had a little boy, Toby, in 2018. So I'm now kind of a retired, still want to be pretend to be occasionally racing cycling mum, and now working in the industry with Trek Bikes, who was my sponsor for the last good few years of my career.
Amazing. I love the way you casually dropped into that. Well, yeah, won the World Championships. very nonchalantly.
You said in a nutshell. I could have been trying to do it quick. Not be here for hours.
Well, hopefully we'll get to that. I guess there's a few things we want to talk to you about. You mentioned about Trek. Now, Paul and I are both riders of Trek e-bikes. We've both got our Rail 9.5s, and we've done lots of things to them and so on. Paul is a much better rider than me, and you are a much better rider than Paul. So I'm going to learn from both of you.
Cool.
So did you just kind of start as a kid? But at what point did you start to think, hold on a minute, I'm quite fast on a bike here. I'm going to start racing, and where did it all start?
Yeah, well, I think it really is a big thanks to my older brother Ed, who this kind of obviously we grew up together. He's 2 years older than me, so as brother and sister, we used to spend hours. We grew up on my family's dairy farm, so we had space to run around. Bikes were always part of our kind of transport and playing items, I guess, we had at home. So I remember just growing up with him kind of challenging me to try and ride along a plank of wood, and we put the plank on some bricks, and then we try and ride along that. And we've got a couple of little patches of wood on the farm with some really steep kind of gullies and chutes, and we used to go up there on a 20-inch frame bike, and I now ride a 17.5. So at that point I was probably 13, 14 on a frame that's too big for me now as an adult, with I think possibly a helmet. I hope it was a helmet, but that would have been it. Going down stuff, I now even look, I think, it was quite steep, really, considering what I was on. There would have been no suspension, there'd been no disc brakes, none of all the luxuries that we have. It would have been flat handlebars, probably with bar ends, something like that. So that's kind of, I guess, how we started doing mountain biking, as it was, on the farm. And then my brother then started riding with some local kids in our local cycling club in Malvern, where I still live now. He started then going to a few races, and that's kind of when the family, then my dad took him. I used to go along and kind of get dragged along because that's where we were going for the weekend. And it was really Ed that kept saying to me, you know what, all these girls I see racing, he said, you're way faster than they are, just the riding we do at home, you should have a go. So it was kind of his persuasion after quite some time. I was never really that fussed. I was into loads of sport at school, was always an outdoory kind of person, but I wasn't desperate to race. And it was actually the Malvern Hills Classic, which is a big bike festival that happened in the mid-90s, with kind of at its peak, I would say. And it's only now just been kind of revamped and reintroduced to the calendar the last couple of years. And it's a big bike festival that's in Malvern Hills. And I went along to that probably around the age of 15, 16 and did really well, and actually won the dual slalom against some of the best girls at the time in the UK, and that's when Ed said, "I told you should be able to do this." But again, I don't think it was until the following year, the same race, I went again because it was a local thing, and did again. And even someone else said to me, "No, you should really have a go at racing." So it did take me a couple of years to kind of be convinced, probably is the best way of saying it. And then started then as racing downhill as a junior when I was 15, and quickly kind of progressed to do nationals and then to do international races as a junior, and then it's snowballed really from there. When I think for many reasons at the start, it was more the success. I enjoyed the winning rather than the actual bike riding. That kind of sounds crazy in some ways, but I didn't really ride my bike from weekend to weekend. I just jumped on at the weekend and raced and enjoyed that kind of the racing aspect. And it's only as years have progressed that the whole cycling thing's become more of a lifestyle, a passion, a part of me, I would say. And racing's obviously been a huge part of that, but it's now less of that, and it's the industry, the biking and what it brings is more part of the bit that keeps me involved in the sport now.
Wow. I love the fact that you kind of, it was something you kind of fell into by accident almost through the persuasion of others, and then you end up being world champion one day. At what point did you think, okay, I'm racing and I'm doing quite well, and I'm beating people regularly. I could do this for a living.
I don't think I ever really, like, even now, I don't feel like I've never planned or mapped out life. I've not got this kind of like, this is what I want to do and this is where I want to be. So I think the racing thing was a little bit the same. It kind of went year by year, and to be honest, sponsorship was very much kind of a year by year basis. The sport was still in its infancy. It was still growing. There wasn't, there still isn't, millions of dollars to be made within mountain biking. It's still, not a highly paid sport. And back then it certainly wasn't as a youngster. So I went to university straight from school. And that's when I started to kind of race internationally and try to balance those kind of things. So I was still like, I'm going to go to uni because, this only might work for a few years. I might get injured. I might not like it. I never had like a big kind of grand plan of in 10 years time, I want to be world champion. It really did evolve year on year. And it was only when I left university in 2000 that I had the opportunity to have a go at kind of racing full time with Kona Bikes back then, a Canadian company. And that's when, the first year I kind of raced full time was when it became apparent that actually maybe this could work for a few years. But even then it was just for a few years. We'll see how we get on. I never ever expected to 20 plus years still be involved within the bike industry, and it becomes such a huge part of my life. It was, it's happened like that.
That's so cool, isn't it?
Wow. And do you think that helped you in your racing, almost having no expectation? So you went into each race event almost with you wanted to do the best for you, but with very little worry about or pressure about what the result was going to be. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think at the time I didn't even really realize. But the one thing I think I'm super grateful to my parents for is they were incredibly supportive, and they took us any way we wanted, every way we wanted. But they knew nothing about the sport. They'd never ridden bikes. They had, not they had no interest. That's not right to say, but they never got involved in any of sponsorship negotiations I had in years gone on from there. They supported us, but we drove it a lot as the kids. I think it was us that wanted to be there, and we definitely drove the whole kind of addiction. That's not quite the right word, but it almost is with sport when you get the bug of something. And it was very much us in the driving seat. And I think that's something that now when I look back and I try and help the next generation of kind of cyclists coming through, I think that's something that's often hard to find these days, because you often see this kind of the pushy parent syndrome in all sorts of sports, where they're getting them on bikes aged 5, 6, and they're going to cross country races every weekend and shouting out, come on, there's kids in tears, and you just think, who wants to do this? Is it the parent? Is it the child? And you have to kind of have that question sometimes. And I think that's something I'm really grateful for, that we definitely, it was all about us wanting to do it, and mum and dad were just there supporting in every way they possibly could, but without any external pressure, which I think as a kid is amazing. And then even with sponsorship, really, I think the one incredible thing now, it's amazing to be part of the sport now. It's grown so much, it's professionalized, there is much more money in the sport, I think, but the advent of social media and all of the things that come with it adds a huge extra dimension to the pressures that athletes now have. And there was none of that. We had to almost wait a week for the results to come out on the back of Cycling Weekly, a print magazine, to actually know how you go on. You entered by sending in your entries on the in the post. It was just like it is incredible what's happened in 20 years to being a sports person. And back then it really was just turn up, race your bike, not worry about the result, not worry about taking any photos or promoting yourself, or how do I look, how do I come across to the public. We rode bikes and had a lot of fun. And in some ways, I'm really, really grateful that I had my time when I did, because there's so many other factors that we all face now, in not just in sport, in everyday life, that tugs on our time and our emotional stability in some ways, because we're trying to fulfill all these different avenues, and it's a different world now. So yeah, that's a long answer, but I think that's probably where we were going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it strikes me for youngsters wanting to get into the sport and become successful. I've got good friends of ours. Their son is into cyclocross, and he's reached a really good level, but only with a massive amount of support from his mum and dad, kind of running them to competitions every weekend. And the commitment. I think if you have that support from your parents, well, actually, let me rephrase that. If you don't have that support from your parents, you're going to really struggle, because the logistics of it. I mean, our friends would think nothing of driving 5 or 6 hours to the north of England to do a race for a weekend and then drive back again late on a Sunday evening.
Yeah, and cyclocross particularly is ridiculously resourceful, because you need 2 bikes. Even you've got tiny kids that've got 2 bikes, because if you need a jet wash, you need all the paraphernalia to wash and clean these bikes, on a muddy cyclocross race. And sometimes the parents' cars are full for just an 8-year-old kid to go into a cross race, and you're like, wow, it's actually a little bit crazy. And there's also, like, you could almost go into don't want to go down that rabbit hole of environmental stuff, but I do think about our races in the UK, that I would love to see a change in how we race cyclocross here in the UK, and actually have, if you go to Belgium, there's a standardized jet wash station that they collect all of that residue of water, oil from your bikes into something, and they dispose of it. Whereas we just turn up in a field, every man for himself, with mum and dad's jet washing all these bikes, and making an absolute quagmire of the place that they've made the pit area to be. And I think there's a lot to be learned from actually European racing, and actually doing it in a much better way. And you don't have to bring all that paraphernalia. Just the jet washers are all set up there, and you just go and use them. So that's off topic, but I do think
No.
It's definitely, it's hard to now, I think, support kids with the cost of everything, the equipment you need to try and be competitive with everyone else who's trying to outdo each other by getting their kid a better bike that's a bit lighter, that's another grand more expensive. It's incredible, the cost of stuff now. And I think cost of fuel to travel, it's it's going to be tough. In some ways, I hope my little boy Toby is into something else that doesn't mean that we have to drive far, but who knows what it'll be.
I mean, I guess ultimately, whatever, I've got friends who've got kids that go kart, and that's like horrifically
Another
expensive,
level.
or into horses, any of those
Anything.
kind of things. You can always spend your money, but I guess there's no substitute for talent. So if you can have the best bike in the world, but if your son or daughter hasn't got that extra thing, that extra factor that you need.
Yeah, definitely. And that's another thing that I'm a real big advocate of, certainly with kids, like starting out on a hardtail. So you learn the skills, you learn to be able to control your bike without suspension kind of allowing you to get away with bad mistakes. Starting out on flat pedals, you don't need all the gear to be able to actually improve and get to a good level. Yes, at a certain point, there is a disadvantage, and you may need some of that. But actually, when the kids are young, the lighter the bike, the easier it is to clean, maintain. It doesn't have to be an all singing, all dancing, top of the range bike. And in some ways, I always feel as well, kids need to appreciate what they've got, and you need to work your way up. And actually, you earn that upgrade by the commitment that you're giving, or the help you're giving to mum and dad, rather than just mum and dad giving you the nicest, greatest thing. That's something I've done with my Timo development team. It's very much, they've been on kind of old bikes of mine to start off with, and then slowly gone up the range from like a intro level up to eventually a 9.9 kind of top of the range Trek race bike. But that comes after a good few years of them kind of being involved, and not just at the outset.
Yeah.
Do you know whether sorry, mate, you go for it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because we obviously get kids coming into the shop looking for new bikes, and you've got kids who are riding to a reasonably good level now, particularly in the local Scottish Enduro series and local Scottish cross-country series and such like. But when you've got folk who are coming in for their first bike, we always say to them, look, the weight of the rider. I mean, you get some of these kids in, and they're probably weigh about the same as my right calf. I mean, they're only sort of 30 to 40 kilos, something like this. And you just go, well, these guys aren't really heavy enough to get the most out of that suspension system. So get yourself a good quality hardtail, learn how to ride the bike first, be dynamic on the bike, go and do a course at a local trail centre, learn how to ride the bike, and then you learn to go fast on a full suspension bike. And that's generally what we advise our parents and kids who come in and looking for a new bike from us.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many good hardtails out there, and it does you just don't get away with those same mistakes. The bike doesn't hide and let you get away with mistakes, so therefore you learn how to. If you can ride a
Yeah,
hardtail smoothly and fast, you get on a suspension bike. It's easy. It's
yeah,
like I always say, going from a cross country race bike. Someone like Hattie Harnden, who I've been involved with for many years for her career, who's now predominantly being an enduro racer for Trek, but she still races a really high level of cross country. And every time you jump off your cross country bike and you go to something with more suspension, it's almost like, wow, this is easy now because you've got
yeah,
this extra kind of gift of suspension. I think a lot of people in the UK particularly think they need to have the most travel to go the fastest, and
yeah,
it's actually like it's often quite a skill compensator. I think the more travel you've got, the poorer the bike rider you can be because you get away with stuff. Whereas actually, you don't need 670 to travel in the UK unless you're going to ride down Fort William downhill track.
yeah,
A 120 bike, I would say, or the 130 bike round most of the UK is adequate, and
yeah,
it would teach you a lot more, and you probably go up hills a lot faster without all that suspension sagging around when we're pedaling everywhere. We don't have gondolas, so
yeah,
you've got to pedal
yeah,
everywhere. So not that I'm
yeah.
trying to not sell your 150, 160 travel bikes. I've just done you out of a deal there, but
No, no,
people will still go and buy
yeah,
them. Don't worry.
no. I 100% agree with you. I mean, we always say to folk when they're coming in looking for a full suspension bike, 85% of folks should be riding Trek Fuel EX.
Mm,
The end. It's just all the bike for going up to the top. Because don't forget, when you park up at the car park at Glen Tress, for example, you've got 500 meters of vertical ascent before the fun starts.
yeah,
So you may as well get on something that's really efficient. You're not absolutely knackered by the time you get there. So you've got a little bit of energy to enjoy the downs.
yeah.
But no, the number of people, it's like, oh, no, I need 160. You go, okay, we've got that.
And downhill tires. They'll
And downhill tires.
stick to the ground like glue. Like, yep, go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah. 2.6 kilos added to your rotational inertia.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah,
Do you not? I mean, I'm guessing though. I guess like many things, there must be quite a lot of peer pressure if you're a kid or a young adult racing, and you're kind of seeing what all the other your competitors are riding, and it's like kids rocking up to school with the best pair of new trainers. It must be the same thing in the bikes, right? So
yeah.
there's an
I'm
element
sure
of
it
what
is.
it looks like rather than what's actually right for them, and that must be a nightmare for parents, right?
Yeah, and I think even to be fair, now I'm in a situation now. Toby's 4. He's got his pedal bike, and yeah, he's got a really nice little pedal bike. But that's more because I know that having a lightweight, easily to pedal bike for a 4-year-old is going to give him a much better experience of riding than some really heavy, cheap thing from the local supermarket. That's purely for the fact of actually like his enjoyment factors out of it. And it is, especially when you know about bikes, you want to probably give them the best stuff because you know that it's good. But I really hope that I will be able to control that desire and exactly do what I've been preaching about and make sure that he doesn't get the latest greatest thing, because ultimately as well, who knows in 5-6 years time whether or not he'll even want to ride a bike. And that's also a thing. You don't want to give kids so much at the start that then they've got nowhere to go with the sport. If they don't achieve that they're on the best thing straight away, where's that progression, where's that kind of like the goal to get the best thing? And I think the biggest thing that I want to see is kids that, whether they race or not, whether they ever do any good, it doesn't matter. I just want to see them riding bikes for the rest of their life, because that's the thing that is the coolest thing about bikes, where it takes you, what you can do, the people you meet, the pleasure you get, and the outside space that you get. Like, that's the thing that's cool about bikes, and that's what I hope kids will keep throughout their life, rather than hating it by the time they get to 15 because their parents have dragged them to a race every weekend to just get cold and wet and sit in the car for 3 hours on the way home. So it's
Yeah.
The ultimate goal is very much different, not just about racing for me.
Mm. Yeah.
Cool. I saw a family on the beach. I was at the West Witterings, and at the weekend. Beautiful, big, golden, sandy beach. And whenever I see someone riding their bike on the beach, I just cringe because I think, just what's that doing to the drivetrain and everything? But they were the Trek family. They were all on e-bikes, and the two kids were probably about 12 and 13, and the lad was on a 9.5, exactly the same as mine. And it's like, there's the e-bike family.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know whether it's something you guys were going to talk about, but hey, why not? When e-bikes first came out, and the thought of seeing kids on e-bikes, and I was like, oh my God, this is so wrong. Like, so wrong to see
I
little
did think
kids
that,
on
to be
e-bikes.
honest, when I first saw them.
Yeah. And then the more I've thought about it, and the more that I am experiencing being a parent and having a child, and I think I use my e-bike, my Trek Rail more, to be honest, at the moment for commuting to nursery with Toby most days when he's there, and family adventures that we do when he's on his Mac ride sat in the front, or I'm towing him with a tow rope on his little bike if we need to go further and he can pedal. And then you start to think, well, that's given us this opportunity to go further, to do more, to have more adventures that we would never have done without the help of the electric, the motor. And then you think, well, actually, imagine that he wants his independence now. He wants to pedal everywhere. He doesn't really want to be he still loves his Mac ride, but he wants to be in charge of his life at 4 already. And then you think, well, imagine if I could give him a bike that would allow him to go a bit further with us, to do a bit of a bigger ride, to have a bit more of an adventure. How much more cool does that become, rather than just riding around the same park every week? They can actually get up onto the hill, and they can go a bit further, and then you start thinking, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. And also that experience of riding an e-bike myself and realizing that it's not a throttle. You don't just sit there and it takes you for a ride. You still have a riding experience. You still have to ride. Yes, it is assisted and it is easier, to a point. And then I thought, well, I kind of have completely changed my opinion on that. And who knows, I don't think it will be just yet, but in a few years' time, I don't think I'm going to be so against letting Toby have a try at an e-bike, and seeing what it enables us to do as a family to achieve that adventure, for me, is the kind of the key to it. So yeah, it's amazing, that initial concept, and even when e-bikes first came, the hatred towards them was so huge from so many people, and how I've even changed my opinion. So it's only going to take time for people to kind of adapt and see it more than just that face value of cheating, whatever you want to put a label on it. So yeah,
I mean,
off topic,
we've chatted on the podcast quite a lot about e-bikes, and on the Cycle Sunday YouTube videos we've done quite a few, and we have covered the subject a fair bit, but I think now we've both got Trek rails, and I've got a couple of nice road bikes. I've got a gravel bike. I've got a full suspension mountain bike, and I've got an e-bike, and I can appreciate them all for the things that they do. But the one thing that I never ever think about my e-bike is it's an easy ride. I go out on my e-bike and I'll go out a couple of hours. I'll come back just as destroyed as if I went out for 2 hours on my gravel bike. The only difference is I go further.
Yep.
It's a different destroyed, isn't it? I think it's.
Yes.
I think it's more of a.
I guess I'm quite a competitive kind of person, so I can't just poodle up a hill. I have to think, right, I'm going to have a really good workout going up here, and I get to the top and I'm blowing. And I can imagine if you just sat in the turbo and a lower gear and just help get the bike to help you up there, for sure. But if you want to work hard on an e-bike, you can.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I realised when I first started riding them properly was how my cadence, so my leg speed is so much faster on the e-bike, because you're wanting to keep on top of that motor. You're wanting it to give you the best help it can by keeping that cadence high. As soon as you get too slow, it doesn't give you that same assistance in it. You get better battery life and all sorts of things. If you can give the motor as much help as you can, you get more from it, if that makes sense. So it's almost like teasing you to go harder the entire time, because it gives you that bit more as well. The only thing that I noticed differently is like the fatigue that you get after that it's a different fatigue. It's such an all over fatigue, because you're working the bike, you're moving the bike, so it's heavier to move. But it's not like your legs have just powered a massive load of watts for those 2 hours. It's definitely a lesser fatigue in terms of leg power exhaustion, I think, but it's almost a complete body exhaustion, because it's such a more of a workout, I think, going at faster speeds, negotiating the terrain at faster speeds, navigating, looking ahead. There's everything. It's fatiguing mentally riding an e-bike, because the speed you're going at, your average speed is so much higher that you're constantly processing the terrain in a different way than you would at a let's say a normal bike speed. So it's quite a sensory overload as well in some ways, I think, which is tiring.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right there. And the other thing that is important, sorry to be Mr. Health and Safety and such like, and Mr. Compliance, but always remember that in the UK, your minimum age for riding an e-bike on a public space, and that includes things like Forestry Commission places and trail centres and all that sort of stuff, is 14. So if you're under 14, you shouldn't be riding an e-bike unless you own that land or on private land of which you have got the owner's permission. So always bear that in mind.
Nice information, Mr. Police.
You are, honestly, he is, this guy, he's like a walking Google.
Well, you have to be, because it's, we often do get people come in saying, because exactly what Tracy's just said about, that's the reason why Rosie and I absolutely love our e-bikes, because I'm able to keep up with her now. And that's what it ultimately delivers is it equalizes rather than, riding a pair of non-e-bikes, people at different fitness levels. You can now ride together and enjoy it. And exactly as Tracy said, as a family, if you've got two folk or three members of a family at different fitness levels, suddenly you can ride at the same speed, at the same distances, and everybody enjoys riding together. But you just have to be careful of the legislation as well.
Thank you. No, that's good to know. I'll delay Toby going on the road until he's 14. Just in case Paul's looking.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, but I mean, for me, I'm the same as Paul. My e-bike, or my wife's got an e-bike. She's called Tracy as well, but with an E. She's got an e-bike, and it means we can go out cycling together, and that's just a game changer for me, and it gets us out on our bikes more. So, tell me a bit more. So, what e-bike have you got, Tracy? Obviously it's a Trek, but
I've got a Trek Rail 9.9. I'm actually waiting for the new 2022 ones, but as everything in the bike industry, we're waiting for things to arrive. But yeah, so
is there a problem of supply in the bike industry?
I think it's something about in the whole wide world. There's something going on. Yeah. So I've currently still got my bike
9.9
from last year. Yeah. Fancy, hey. Well, you're supposed to. I guess if you're going to race them, then you should probably try and use the best one out there. But probably spec a bit differently from standard. Got RockShox axis, so wireless dropper and gears, which again is quite a nice addition. Definitely you don't need. You can certainly change gears still with
We have wireless gears on ours. Don't worry.
Oh, there you go. I haven't got to defend myself then.
No,
and it's quite nice actually when you get used to it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I put in our on our YouTube channel a thing about the electronic gears, and one of the things I've been enjoying is because of the packaging of modern bikes, trying to get the travel, the short chainstay length, the tyre volume, the big diameter wheels, and just packaging all that together. A lot of the cabling for gears now are having to take quite acute angles. So I've always, I do find that on these modern full suspension, larger travel bikes, that the electronic gears do hold their indexing better than mechanical systems. So no, I don't think it is. I don't think it's a luxury. I think it actually works flipping brilliantly. Absolutely great.
Yeah, and I think I am so old-fashioned in many ways, and I was thinking, how's this going to work? What's going to happen if I get some interference from something? You're going to then, or if someone's on the side of the course and starts tampering with them with some technology that I don't, is beyond my. But yeah, I mean, I've ridden it in all sorts of conditions, and as long as you make sure stuff's charged, obviously.
Yes.
Then like everything, then actually there's, and that's another thing with the Bosch motor. I have to say I am an ambassador for Bosch, so I'm not going to stand here and say how they're amazing. But I'm amazed how much water, grotty UK winter slop you can immerse them in And
Yeah.
to think of something, we think electronics. I always think, oh, don't get near the bath. Just worry about electronics. And you think, put that in terms of a really wet, grotty mountain bike. The Scotland EWS last year on the e-bike was pretty grim. It rained all day long, and not missed a beat. And the same, with all the technology that we've got with the droppers, with the gears, everything's been pretty bomb-proof considering some of the stuff that you end up riding through. And with that extra power and that grit and the grindiness, and you just think, oh, there's so many things that could go wrong in that race situation. And it's been either I've been super lucky or I've been good to my equipment, and everything's really, really bomb-proof.
Yeah.
So talk to me about racing an e-bike, because I'm completely unknowledgeable about this. What are the rules in terms of modes you can use, gears? What is it? Is it literally just there's an e-bike, first one past the finishing line wins, or
a few different formats? I would say. Then again, we're at the very, very infancy of this sport in many ways. E-bike racing has only been happening for a couple of years, I would say. I mean, EWS has only had 2 years now. I guess a little bit of COVID kind of maybe held some stuff back, but we're only on this will be the third year of the Enduro World Series. So Enduro being like a rally car format, so multiple stage downhills, and you have to pedal in between those stages. So same format on the e-bike, but what they've done is given you, it's either 2 or 3 batteries depending on the event. They're going to potentially look at doing a 2 battery race, just to logistics of traveling with batteries, and also a bit of environmental impact of having more people affording more than one battery as well. But you do need multiple batteries to be able to race an EWS, so the enduro format of e-biking at the moment. You're limited obviously to the speed limit, so no chipped bikes allowed. So they do random checks for making sure that you're not going more than 25k an hour. And there's no actual motor limit as such in terms of, not motor limit, battery size
Capacity.
Limit in terms of capacity. Yeah. That's the word we need. Because it's really quite hard to limit that, I think, with enduro. And also the idea with enduro is that actually it's about the time downhill section still. So it's really about the skill rather than necessarily, how far or how fast you go in between those stages. There is a certain time element, and they make you crack on, to get to stage to stage. You have to be at the start of the next stage at a certain time. You can't just sit in eco and dawdle away all day. You have got to keep a pretty good pace. But the idea is you can generally get round that loop on a battery. Again, depending on rider weight, again, that's a big factor. If you're 100 kgs versus someone that's 60, you're not going to go as far on your same battery as you will on the heavier person. So that does play into it. But generally, they've done it so you do about 1,500 meters of climb probably each loop, with potentially 2 to 4 stages within that loop. And there's 3 different loops. So you do a loop, come back, change your battery, go back out, do a second loop, change battery, and third loop. That's how they've done it the last few years. So it's quite a big long day out. You can be doing, up to 5,000 meters of climbing and descending within that day. But again, it's very much idea. It's about the technical downhill element rather than the climbing. There are 1 or 2 climbing stages in these races as well. So that's like a power stage. It's normally quite short, so it's not, again, hugely biased towards who's the fittest. It's quite often skill based as well. So it might only be a minute, maybe a minute and a half tops of a bit of an effort. It's really steep, techie, can you get up it kind of terrain, which actually has been quite cool. It's been quite well received. If it's close to the kind of main start finish hub, you get a lot of people watching to try and see you fail or try and clean a section. And it's actually become
trying to get you on Instagram.
The most nervous bit of that race, like waiting, for your start time. It's individual, obviously, against the clock. Like thinking, oh my word, I've got to race up this hill. Whereas I've raced downhill for the last 20 years and it's not really scared me. Whereas racing uphill has been the scariest thing ever. But it's quite a fun element, I think, that brings a difference to the e-bike. You don't want to race uphill on a normal enduro bike; it would be horrendous. But on the e-bike, it's just an added concept that allows us to do it because we're on e-bikes. So that's enduro. There's then the e-bike world tour. I think I've said that correctly, which is like the freeride world tour of skiing. It's the same company that basically have now running a kind of a summer discipline with e-bikes, and they're putting on 3 events throughout Europe. And it's it's almost like marathon style. So it's 1 or 2 day format, sometimes 3. There's been one in Verbier the last 3 years, I think, and that was a pair. So it's 2 of you doing a 3-day kind of stage race almost. And it was like the clock starts at the start of the day and finishes at the end of the day. And you can do you had to have, the first year you had to have 4 batteries for the day, and you were allowed a certain limit of batteries. So whether you had a 500 watt or a 650 watt, you only allowed something like 2,000, whatever the limit was. So you had to kind of work out which battery you could work, and then sometimes only you had to end with a certain percentage to make sure there was a fair, same battery capacity usage total, if that makes sense, for the day. But you were carrying a battery on your back, and then you had one exchange place where you would then get 2 fresh batteries and give your one for your bike, one for your bag back halfway. But those were huge days out. We were doing 3,000 meters each half, so 6,000 meters of climbing, and then up to nearly 180k, 90k over, Verbier, Mont Blanc, Tour de Mont Blanc kind of terrain. So pretty epic. Even carrying e-bikes on your back for sections because it was unrideable with kind of chains, like proper adventure. But that's evolved even in the last 3 years to the point that now you're not allowed to carry a battery in your back, because that was, again, I think, a health and safety kind of danger problem, that if you fall with a battery, the weight of it was horrendous to try and ride, with the downhilling with a kind of a battery on your back. But that's still like a marathon-esque adventure style race series, which is awesome, and in some ways probably what e-bikes are destined to do in some ways, because it's that adventure, how far you can go. That would be a massive day to do on a normal bike. You probably wouldn't do it in a day, kind of thing, the terrain that you cover. And then there's also the UCI, so our International Cycling Union's cross-country format. So the Olympic cross-country racing that we were seeing at the Olympics, they have now got an e-bike race. There's a series doing that called the West Series, which is just cross-country, an hour and a half racing, multiple laps, small laps, mass start. And there's also a World Championships. There's been now, I think, 3 World Championships, rainbow stripe band, the same throughout all cycling, that's awarded every year at the UCI World Championships for mountain biking. So those are kind of the 3, I would say, distinct kind of avenues of how e-bikes are at the moment. Again, are still evolving. And then in the UK, there's local enduros where you can actually just rock up on an e-bike and ride around with your mates that aren't on an e-bike, but there's still a separate category at the end of the day, but it's not like a separate event as such. They're kind of combined, and actually I think that's actually really nice as well. That's kind of like your introduction to the sport. You can ride with your mate or your partner that's not as fast as you, but you can still go and do the same race together. And I think that's, again, quite a cool. I did one actually last weekend, a Wednesday midweek race. It was one of those like, don't give your name, say you're working from home day.
Brilliant.
And at Bike Park Wales. And that was, again, it was a mixture. There was obviously an e-bike, results sheet at the end of the day, but there was just e-bikes riding around with normal bikes. And it was a mashup format where the timing was open for 5 hours, and you could do each one as many times as you wanted within that time. So, and it was quite cool. I think we're starting to see this mix of, rather than this segregation of e-bikes over here and normal bikes here, and we don't talk to each other. I felt like it was the first race where I'd seen a bit of acceptance of both. Yeah, it's still annoying when I was slogging up the hill and an e-bike comes hooning past, but at the same time, I've been that person too. So I think we're all getting to see both sides of the fence now.
We all have. I can remember chewing the bar tape going up Mont Ventoux, and this fat bloke with a builder's bum crack and Jesus creepers flew past me on a e-bike, went, keep going. I'm like,
yeah. Exactly.
I had no idea that. So that's really cool. It must be quite cool to be at the beginning of a new style of racing. If it's only been a couple of years to kind of.
I think that's probably the one of the biggest reasons why I've kind of got involved in many ways. I think I was fortunate enough to be, even when downhill really started, I was kind of there at the beginning of actual downhill bikes, rather than just racing downhill on a cross-country bike. So I've seen that huge evolution. And then when the Enduro World Series started in 2013, it wasn't planned. Just happened to have finished my downhill career, and I love the idea of doing more descents than just one in one day. So Enduro came around. I was involved in that first ever race in the first ever year of the series, and it kind of felt like it was almost the next thing for me to kind of be involved with, give some input, use my experience and knowledge. And definitely that's one of the things that Trek and Bosch have both said. I'm not paid to be a racer anymore, but I'm definitely, they'd love me to be involved and do a few of these different events just to give feedback, help make drive where the sport goes, because there's so much to learn. I think in the e-bike thing is still so new to so many people, and racing them is definitely still new. I don't expect it to still look like it does now in another 2 or 3 years time. I'm sure it's going to evolve, and as technology grows, the bikes change, they get lighter, batteries get smaller, all the rest of it. It's going to keep evolving, I think, for many years to come.
So if you're if you were looking at doing a downhill, and just give us an idea of the difference for you from a, I don't know, technique and stuff between doing it on a downhill mountain bike and on an e-bike. Is it a very different approach, or is it just because obviously the e-bike's going to weigh a lot more? But what other differences would there be?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the skills are the same. Your actual, like, how you corner, how you go for drop, how you jump. In essence, they're very much the same. The difference is the weight of the bike. And I think the lighter you are, or the less strong you are as a rider, the bigger that difference becomes. I know there's quite a few of the big strong guys, actually they really love their e-bike almost more than a normal bike because of that extra weight, because it gives it more stability. The weight of the battery is always quite low and quite centered. It's a real stable, almost confidence inspiring feel. Whereas me, as someone who's I'm not as strong as some of those guys, I'm not as heavy as some of those guys, I definitely notice the difference in weight hugely, and I feel like I'm not able to be as in control and throw the bike around as much as I would on a normal bike, on my e-bike, because of that weight, and I'm a bit more of a passenger, I would say, on it. So it does require me to ride it probably a little bit differently in terms of, yeah, I'm not able to be in charge as much. I'm definitely a bit more of a go with my bike. Not as dynamic a rider probably as I would be on a normal bike. And also I think the braking is the biggest thing for me. It's like you need as big a rotors as you can possibly get. I've gone to 220 rotors on my e-bike for sure, because alpine descents, when you're braking a lot, that extra momentum to try and slow down is hard, and that again feeds onto your hands, and your arm fatigue definitely is a lot harder, I think, on arms than a conventional bike. But in terms of feeling, sometimes actually grip is better on the e-bike. Again, extra weight on the tires gripping. The traction can feel amazing on an e-bike compared to a normal bike. So subtle differences, but ultimately your skills and your basic core bike riding skills don't change. You're still on the bike with two wheels. It's just a few little like tweaks, I would say, as to braking points and maybe how you balance the bike with the weight in some ways.
And then the next question, because Paul did a great video a couple of weeks ago on the Criterium Cycles YouTube channel of him doing a descent to some cool, funky, rocky music and stuff. And I watched that and it terrified me. And then I'm sure if I watch one of yours, and I've got a few friends I know who do downhill, and so as someone aspiring to be better going downhill, can you give me like a few tips in terms of things that, fundamentals that you should be looking at? I mean, obviously, just don't hold on to your brakes and don't scream like a wuss. But what's the
I'm
the
gonna do
basic
something.
things?
I think I'll say something that you probably aren't going to expect here. And I said, don't necessarily go downhill. Let's go back to a flat car park. Can you balance? Can you do it? Can you lift your front wheel up and over a log? Can you lift your back wheel? Can you corner well? Can you? There's so many basic car park skills that we all need or should have to ride a bicycle down a hill in a controlled and safe manner. And yes, everyone wants to go straight to, I want coaching, I want to ride downhill this hill fast. Great, that's ultimately where we all want to go. But it's hard to teach someone to do that if they actually don't have good brake control on the flat. If they can't, they don't know which brake's which. They can't stand up in a nice, balanced, neutral position on their bike with their knees and their elbows bent in a nice manner, and they're not just statically hanging off the back of their bike. It is impossible to try and teach those skills on a downhill if you can't actually do them on the flat. So I'm like, take that step back. Let's reassess where are we at. You don't have to be able to do a massive bunny hop and a wheelie and all the rest of it, but you need to have brake control, you need to have balance, and you need to have some way of looking ahead rather than staring at at that next rock. And a lot of that can be achieved on the flat before we even get to a downhill. So I'm sorry, that sounds really dull, but
No,
ultimately
not at all. No,
that's
because I
where
think
it starts. And people
there'll be
ever
people
go back
listening
there.
thinking, "Oh, I quite fancy having a go to a bike park or go find I've got the back of my house. I live in the South Downs, and there's a sort of it's a bit rough and ready sort of downhill bit, and I go there and think, oh, should I go down that? And actually, it's good advice to not just go straight for the downhill and the hero status and end up riding into a tree.
People have always said to me, they think, oh, you've ridden downhill for a gravity thing for 20 plus years. Like, oh, you must have broken every bone in your body. You're mad. You're crazy. I'm like, I'm not any of those things. Yes, I have broken a few things, and I'm definitely going to have a few injuries when I get older, but I'm fairly intact. I'm not full of metal, and I'm not crazy. I mean, maybe you disagree, but it's a lot of it's calculated, and I don't just jump off some crazy gap if I don't know I can do it. Yes, I've taken risks when I'm racing for sure, and I've done a few silly things, but in general, I don't, every time I go off my bike I don't crash. And you hear some people tell stories of like, oh, if you haven't crashed on this ride, you haven't been trying hard enough. I'm like, I disagree. Like, that's not
Yeah.
part of mountain biking. We're not meant to fall off every time we go out, and if you are, then there's something not quite right. so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
reassess.
Indeed. And it is one of those things that if you can, it's lovely to hear what you're saying, because you can, if you've got your body positioning right, you've got your footwork right, if you go off a curb onto the road in a lovely neutral square way, it doesn't matter then whether that curb is a 6-inch curb or whether it's a 12-inch drop off or if it's an 18-inch drop off. The only difference is pretty much your flight time.
Yeah.
But if the
And your
bike
speed of
is
approach.
and your speed of approach, and if the bike is just landing nice and flat and neutral, then ultimately it's just your flight time. But you're right, don't go straight in for a 3-foot drop off. Go and take off a curb first. Do you hit nose down? Do you hit back wheel first? Do you hit nice and square? Look at all those things. It's great to hear.
Cool. I'm gonna. One of the things we like talking about on Cycle Sunday is technology and geeking out about all kinds of things, whether it's on a mountain bike or a road bike. So, in your career as a competitive racer, you've clearly seen an awful lot of development in terms of bike technology. What are your kind of key standout technologies that you can kind of think when they came in, you went, this is a game changer? I mean, I know there's maybe some obvious things, but there must be some where you just think, oh wow, this is going to change things forever.
There's a few. I mean, suspension has been a huge thing, but that's been such a massive evolution right from the very start, and that's continuing. That's always going to be there, I think, in every sport, that fine tuning of suspension technology. So that's been amazing, but it's never going to slow down, I don't think, in many ways. I think the ones that the disc brakes were a massive help. To be able to, certainly, living and riding in the UK, we spend half the year riding in the wet. Actually knowing that you're going to stop and you're going to have consistent braking and have the ability to brake at high speed on steep wet terrain was amazing. Drop a seat post, I think, is probably one of the biggest inventions that has, I think, made descending for people so much more accessible and safer, and enabled us to go off bigger stuff faster, better. Amazing. They're just incredible things, I think. And even some people now, you still think, oh, I don't need one of those, and then they have one, and it's hard. I now couldn't go back, I don't think, to try and ride my seat post up. I'd feel quite dangerous, but I did years of it, so that was amazing.
We've actually found a new or another use for dropper seat posts. So,
what's that?
Well, my wife's quite small, and she's got an e-bike supplied by Paul, and she was struggling with having her saddle at the right height for riding along, and being able to stop and start the bike, because she's not that confident because the e-bike's quite heavy.
Yeah.
So we put a dropper seat post on it, and when she wants to stop, she just drops the seat down and touch the floor at a junction, and then strike off from the junction, and then pop the seat back up to the normal height. And she's never going to go anywhere near a downhill mountain bike descent, but the dropper seat post has fundamentally changed her confidence on the bike.
Yeah, totally. I can totally see that, because every time you stop anywhere, I just naturally put it down, because it's just easier, isn't it? Just to on and off.
Yeah.
So no, really interesting.
Sorry, the only other thing
I was going to say for me was probably is wheel size in many ways, and I was a really big what on earth do we need to change wheel size? I've ridden 26-inch wheels forever, and that was 2013. There probably had been a few 27.5s a couple of years before that, but I was very much like, no, that's ridiculous. Why would you do this? And then Trek came out with their first ever Remedy 29er, which was a 130, 140 travel 29-inch enduro bike aimed at racing kind of enduro trails before enduro racing had really started. And I remember getting that bike delivered to me actually like a week before I left to Italy for the first ever Enduro World Series race, thinking, I've got no idea. I'm going from my 26-inch bike straight to this, thinking, well, I'll ride it for a day and see, thinking, oh, it's going to be horrendous. I came back from that first day and I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Like, I am racing this. I remember riding back into the campsite that day, and one of the guys from the media said to me, "Wow, what are you riding?" And this was before actually they released the bike. I remember getting into a massive trouble because I ended up winning on the damn thing, and it hadn't been released. And Trek were like, "We can't have any pictures of this bike out there." I'm like, "Well, you just let me race it. What do you expect? I'm sorry." But yeah, I remember this guy just saying, "What are you riding, a 29?" I was like, "Oh, I don't think that's a good choice for this course this weekend." And I never forget that because I was just like, I think it was pretty good. And at that point, I was probably very, very few of us who had chosen 29ers in that first year of racing EWS. And then now look at it, it's like, it's the norm. And I now look at 26-inch bikes and think, oh my goodness, how could I have ever ridden that off a curb even? So I think that's given us a huge confidence for many people with that wheel size, rolling over stuff that you would have probably got stuck on before. I know it's not always the answer for some, for kids and for women that are small. They often find you're a bit too high up and maybe a bit too tall. But I think the way bikes have been made and the frames have made around them now, I think it's solved a lot of those issues. And I think that's been a pretty incredible advent. And now we've got motors and e-bikes. That's the next thing. And where does that go? That's going to be good few years of evolution there.
Yeah, I guess for that, I mean, I still get blown away. I know you mentioned about the Bosch motor before. I still get blown away by the numbers. The torque and power output of that motor is frankly ridiculous, considering it's on a push bike.
And to think that there's knowing that from what Bosch has said that it could do more. Like it's not limited by them. It's limited by kind of
legislation, really.
Exactly. I was going to say, what we're allowed to do. Yeah. So they already have got things in the works that will be, as things evolve, be incredible. So the technology's there.
Chains and destroying rear mechs and stuff if it did anymore.
Climbing up vertical cliffs like a motor trials bike. Just away. Yeah.
No, I just it is an amazing thing, and coming back to the whole chat about e-bikes, we've said it a million times, haven't we, Paul? If you are doubting about an e-bike, just go and have a go on one.
Yeah. The only people who actually complain about e-bikes are those people who haven't actually ridden one yet. Just go and ride one, because then it turns from why would you to why wouldn't you, and it's great. It's just fantastic.
Like I said, I've still got all my other bikes, and I'll have a feeling of the kind of ride I want to go on, and sometimes it's an e-bike ride. One of the things I would say actually is that the routes that I've done I've lived where I am now for 9 years, and the kind of mountain bike trails and stuff that I've got round here, they're all new now because I'm on an e-bike. They're different because you ride them and it's different. Your appreciation, because first of all you're going faster uphill, but you can cover more ground. It's just renewed my love of the area I live in because it's a different bike ride.
I was going to just put my boring health and safety hat on there though, and just change roles, just in the sense of being a responsible e-bike rider as well. Though there's all about why wouldn't you? Then great, let's all try it and let's do it, but don't be an idiot with it. Don't be that person that comes hooning by everyone else that hasn't got an e-bike and is like, and just be courteous. And also think about, yes, you are going further, the way you ride it. If you get stuck up on a hill and you try and get back on and you're just constantly spinning out the back wheel because you haven't got the technique to be able to do it, don't rip up the trail and be an I'll be polite. Be an idiot. Just be being responsible, whether you're on an e-bike or not. Being a responsible human being and being courteous to other people that are enjoying the outdoor space as well is the most important thing. And don't forget, you're going fast. You're going to come across animals, wildlife, things aren't expecting to hit a bike, a quiet thing, to come round a corner at 25k an hour if it's a uphill, let's say. And I just think just being smart, like just don't be an idiot, because you're going to ruin it for the rest of us that love riding bikes, whether it's with a motor or not. And I think there's definitely more of a tendency, I think, for people to they're coming new to the sport, new to mountain biking through e-bikes that haven't necessarily grown up with the etiquette culture, being in the outdoors, being respectful, taking a little, all sorts of stuff. I could go on, and I don't want to sound like a boring.
No.
But I think
knock yourself out. I mean, to be honest, that's any cyclist. A lot of that stuff is the.
But I do feel like
on the road.
You're getting a lot of new intake to the sport and to the experience of mountain biking from having a motor, that won't have, and they're going to places they would never have got to because they don't have the fitness to before as well. So they're maybe not equipped in terms of the outdoor clothing, and they've got themselves up to somewhere where suddenly the weather changes and they're in their blooming trainers and they've got a t-shirt on. All those kinds of things. It's like there's an education needs to come with it, and an appreciation and respect for the sport that you are now involved in and have been taken to because of the ability of a motor. Without your skill or your fitness, that you would have spent years honing those skills, observing how to behave in that environment. You're suddenly there and you're like, oh, I didn't realize this is what you're supposed to do.
Yes.
So,
no, agreed. 100%. Yeah.
I'm gonna add something as well. Paul will like this one, because I know a couple of people who've got e-bikes that have had them chipped, and the first thing, oh look, I've chipped it, and it's I'm like, fine, but you're gonna knacker your drivetrain, you're gonna knacker your chain, and all your warranty and stuff is.
I was going to say, have no warranty.
So just don't do it, people.
Yeah. And always remember that when you are riding, and I think a lot of people think that riding at places like Glen Tress or Bike Park Wales or something like that, that is off-road and not on the public highway, so you can do what you like. It is not true. If you are not on your own private land that you own, it is public land. So if you are on what is effectively an illegal bike and you come across, a family on a walking hike or something like that and knock somebody over, you have just knocked somebody over on an illegal bike. So your public liability is on you. So, just keep them legal. These things are fast enough. You don't need to go any faster. They're amazing.
Hey, now we're nearing the end of our hour, but should we give some teasers as to what might be happening later on in the year?
We certainly can.
Oh, wait. Over to you, Mr. Bowker.
Well, it is one of those things that we would, I think we'd love to do more with Tracy. Obviously, Tracy's got huge year ahead, very, very busy all the time, supporting Track Factory Racing and all those sorts of things. But I think there is there's sort of like a common desire to do more bits and pieces. So hopefully we'll be able to do maybe a bit of filming and a couple of videos with Tracy in the future, which will be really exciting to do.
In the car park with me jumping off curbs.
In the car park, yeah.
No, definitely. I think I'd love to do something where there's like you said, there's lots of different events that you can do to have a go at racing an e-bike if you want to race an e-bike. There's definitely no requirement that everyone has to go racing. But yeah, there's an event later on in September in Scotland that is very much an introduction, the Bosch EMTB Challenge, that parts of the Tweed Love Festival, and that's a really, really amazing place, I would say, to start if you ever want to have a go at an e-bike race. It's not really a race, it's more of a challenge. But yeah, if I get a chance in the schedule and our planets align to do some kind of tips as to how to get the most out of going from just being that Sunday weekend rider to actually going and trying something that has a clock and a chip and some timing and some stress around it, and how you cope with all those things, it would be a really cool thing that I think a lot of people would hopefully enjoy and get something from.
Yeah, very much.
That sounds like something I need to put in the diary and work towards.
Yes.
September it is. See you there.
Yes.
Good. Let's do it. What a great way. Now, guys, we are nearing the end of our hour. Tracy, I wanted to thank you very, very much for taking time out to talk to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I could quite happily continue this for another hour or two, but I know you've got things that you need to do today. But I look forward to meeting you in person, and you can kind of give me some tips about how I can get better on my bike.
Most definitely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure, Paul. It's been just ace getting this podcast back up and running again after our 3-month break.
Indeed.
We've been both ridiculously busy, but we need to start the podcast again because we've got people asking for it. So
yeah, and what way to start. Thanks so much, Tracy.
Amazing.
No worries. You're welcome. Great to chat.
Cool. Well, guys, stay tuned. As I said, the Cycle Sunday podcast now will be every fortnight. So twice a month, you will get a podcast going live on Sunday at 6 o'clock. But for now, thanks to Tracy. But I've been Pete Greaves.
And I've been Paul Bowker.
And Tracy,
Right,
you can
so
say,
I've been Tracy Moseley.
there we
Yeah.
Here we
go.
go. Wait, sorry guys.
You take care,
Didn't get
guys,
the
and
script.
ride safe.
Thanks.